Good morning, everyone. Gotta have my coffee. I hope everybody's safe and healthy during these current crazy times. This is something none of us have ever experienced before. So I know people are going stir crazy and they're kind of in lockdown in a lot of states. We have been here where I am in Connecticut and many of the surrounding states. So all we can do is hope for the best, expect the worst, and hopefully soon enough this will all pass and we'll be able to kind of get back to some sort of normalcy here. In the meantime, I know I put a poll up the other day on Instagram, and I'm going to get some hate on this right now. Streamer or bug, and 75% to 25% people wanted streamers over bugs. But I kicked this YouTube channel off with 4 streamers so far. Excuse me. So I'm sorry we're going to do a bug today. If you want to dislike me and not follow me, my feelings won't be hurt. You won't trigger me. But I'd be remiss not to do some bugs. The one we're going to do today, I'm sure a few of you saw on my Instagram feed, and I'll zoom in on it when I get to the tying sequence. But it's a Hendrickson style nymph that I've been fishing for, probably 2 decades. And I know some of you older folks out there are like, that guy looks like he's in his 20s, but I'm not. I'm in my mid-40s now. I'm super old, and I got to wear these damn things to tie some of these smaller bugs now, which I'm kind of struggling with because I've had above average eyesight my whole life. It's the stuff up close that's giving me a hard time. But anyway, I digress. I don't exactly know where this pattern originated, but I do know when I first started guiding, myself, another guy who since changed shops, Tori Collins, and I both, it was kind of funny, and there was another guy that used to work there, Aaron Jasper. Some of you guys probably know him. The 3 of us all kind of tied a very, very similar Hendrickson nymph, and I tie like 3 or 4 different variations. I mean, you can always get away with the standard old pheasant tail, but these little guys lose their effectiveness after a while. But we all really fell in love with a specific style of dubbing that originated out of the Delaware River Club, and Al Cucci and Bob Nastasi did in one of their old books, basically called Spectrumized dubbing. And it was funny because I had somebody commented on this, oh, it looks like a rainbow scud dub, and yeah, it does. But the beauty of this stuff, and you see it in the package, is, and they do these in every kind of buggy colors, is the blend percentages per color are what dictate the actual natural color of this dubbing once it's wet and it's in a natural environment. And you can actually change that and alter it a little bit by the color of threads that you use. Highly effective stuff. These guys were onto something. They were way ahead of their time. So I'm sure they tied a style of Hendrickson nymph with this, and I am just borrowing the main ingredient, which is the dubbing, as well as other people, into making a nymph that's highly effective. I've got her off to my left, like, you know, I don't want to spill these, but 3 different piles here, and I'm actually making piles for myself for a change. You know how that goes. I tie this, and I'll do a second video on this. I'll follow it right up with it. But I do a soft tackle variation of this because soft tackles of these work really well. And then there's the nymph. And the nymph I tie in like roughly 3 different sizes. So I'll talk about that more in the video. Super easy tying sequence. And no, it's not got a tungsten bead on it like every other darn nymph I see out there. Listen, not negating the effectiveness of weighted flies. Hands down, works really, really well. But don't be short-sighted and don't carry. Do not be the guy or girl who doesn't carry any non-beaded, lightly or non-weighted nymphs in your nymph boxes, because you're going to run into situations where you got too much damn weight on your setup, and now what do you do? So don't kind of pigeonhole yourself into a corner and be a one-trick pony. Alright? So enough of my rant today, and we'll get to tying this guy. Tying sequence is quick. Alright, here we go. Alright, so here we go. First things first, I'm going to tie this in a size 12 today, just so you can kind of see. This is the larger of the two sizes that I tie it in. But I tie these in 16s, 14s, and 12s. The very first thing we're going to want to do, and if you look at a real Hendrickson nymph, they're kind of flat. They're a little broader, wider, stubbier style nymph. So this is actually one where if you're new to tying nymphs, if you kind of overdress it, don't tear everything off and retie it, because it'll probably still fish. First thing we're going to do is just put a little thin coat of crazy glue on there, and then we're going to take some 15,000th lead wire and wrap an underbody on here. This is just to help us sink the fly a little bit, but more so to just give us a little bit of an underbody. And I'm going to go right up to about an eye's width behind the eye. We're going to use that trick that you probably saw me do on the push these together on one of those streamers I tied, where you take the lead wire and you flatten it with a pair of pliers. That's just going to help me have a nice taper instead of an abrupt drop off at the back of the fly. And the first thing we're going to do now is we're going to start with our tying thread. For this particular one, we're using a brown Vivis. You can use dark brown, UTC 70, whatever works. We're going to start right at the point of the eye and work our thread over this lead wire. You don't need to cover everything, but I like to take at least a turn down, a turn back. So you can use multiple different types of feathers for the tails on these, but what I found hold up the best, you can use mallard. I see a lot of Hendrickson's nymphs tied with mallard because they have this beautiful like honey color, which is very, very reminiscent of the tails and the legs on a Hendrickson, honey colored speckled. But what I find with those is they break really easily. So the tail's not really the trigger on this fly. I'll get into the trigger on this nymph once I get to it, but I prefer to use Brahma hen. So I'll take, this is either a straw color or a March brown color, and you can go, you can overdress the tails on these, because the tails on these particular nymphs are relatively broad and stubby. So you know, I'm not going to pull just like 3 fibers of this out. I'm going to probably pull a very generous bunch. I mean, if I was to sit here and count these out, it's probably like 10 to 12. So you just peel that right from the feather. Take a look at it. We'll measure it up so that my tail is roughly the overall length, and I'm going to bring it, as you can see, my thread's not right where the tail's going to start. I start it up here because that way I can work my way back and then come forward again. So I want my tail to be roughly just shy of the same length of the overall body of this fly. You can come in and cut some of these butt ends off. They're going to get covered anyway. And then I'm going to work my thread right down to where that bend is going to start on the hook. And then I'm going to tie in my wire rib. And I'm using, you can use either like that copper brown or amber. I'm using the amber on this one. Brassy sized wire. If I get down to a 16, then I'll probably go down to small. So we're going to try and keep this on the underside. Just catch it with the thread. And then work our thread right over those little butt sections. And what you see we've already done is we've already built a nice little taper there. Now we're going to tie in our abdomen. The abdomen and the thoracic region on this fly is the same. This is the dubbing I was explaining to you, Spectrumized. This is a dark brown, but if you look at it, it's not. It's overly yellow with all different colors in it. But when this stuff gets wet, it turns almost like a dark brown. Another color you can use for this too is the reddish brown. I like this dark brown for the nymph. Now the one thing you'll see is this is all like a rabbit style dubbing, so you know, it's if you got anything that you're on your fingers, like mine right now are pretty chewed up from doing a workout the other day, so I've got some cuts and some other things on here, but you want to kind of make sure your hands are relatively clean and kind of static free, because this stuff catches on everything. So we're just going to dub to do the abdomen a tapered noodle of dubbing, and it's literally only going to be a couple inches worth of material at best. So we'll get our thread and our dubbing right back to the tie-in point where the tail is, and then we're just going to work our way forward. One little trick that I like, and you can do this after a while, typically when I dub this stuff, you'll see I got a nice little tapered body here, is I'll typically try and preen some of those fibers. You're going to get, because this is some spiky stuff, you're going to get some of these errant like guard hairs and stuff in here. I just kind of cut them out. Now, we've wrapped our thread, so this is just a little trick. We wrap our thread this way, right? So we're going to wrap our wire in the opposite direction. That makes sense? Counter rib it, like so. And you can do some nice little evenly spaced ribs right up to where our tie-in is. And we're going to go back a little bit over that, take a couple turns, and I just take my thumbnail, put it right on there, and I break that wire off. Gives me a nice little clean burr in there, and then I'm good. Now, the next thing we're going to do is we're going to tie in our wing case, and the wing buds on this is what I consider the trigger on this fly. This particular pattern works the best pre-hatch right up into the hatch of these bugs, as does the soft hackle. But what you'll find is with these Hendrickson nymphs are in the drift a couple different times during the year. We'll get a huge migration of these things like late winter, and I've been out there and I've had other people that have been out there on the water, and they're like, dude, there's thousands of these things in the river, and a regular pheasant tail or some sort of a darker Hendrickson nymph will work well. Those bugs are migrating to where a section of the river where they're basically going to hatch when the spring comes. So what ends up happening with these, when these insects, these nymphs, get just about to the point where they're ready to pop, their wing buds get really dark. So the trigger for this fly is a dark wing case, and there's a multitude of things that you can use for this. I'm actually using flat body glass by Sibai in black, but you could use scudback, you could use thin skin. Thin skin works fantastic. So I'm basically just going to tie this in, and just by catching the top of the thread with a thread, so this is going to kind of envelope right over that. And what you're going to see here is I'm going to actually tie back over some of this dubbing that I've already got on here for my thoracic region, or my abdomen rather. So I get to about the halfway point, and then I'm just going to put a half hitch on there. Go back in, get some more of my dubbing. The dubbing I'm going to use is the same stuff. This time though, I'm not going to use a tapered noodle. I'm going to make it relatively uniform in diameter, with a slight taper. And I'm just going to kind of start wrapping this stuff over, making sure it stays relatively tight. And as you see here, I'm not going all the way up to the point of where the eye is. I'm leaving some space there. I'll show you why. I'm going to use some Brahma hen once again for the legs. So what I just basically did here, you'll see I've got the tip portion of a Brahma hen feather. You can use a generous amount of these too. Their legs are pretty stocky. So what I typically do is just pull this stuff back like you see here, and we're going to tie this in right on the top. So what ends up happening when you go to do your first wrap is, if your thread's untwisting, which mine is right now, when you go to make your first wrap, it's going to try and fight you. So if you turn it in the right direction, it'll work with you. I got some errant fibers in here, I just kind of cut them out. So I place my legs up on here, take a look at where they're at. Take one loose wrap over. When I come over, I tighten it down. Take a second, look at where my legs are. I have to kind of maneuver a couple, I will. Take a third, and then I'm going to fold that feather rearward, go over it twice, then I'm going to cut it. Now I'm going to pull my wing case over, and I pull it kind of tight. And you can see I'm holding it with my right hand, as I'm wrapping thread wraps over it. Once I've locked it in place, a couple of turns, and I'll let go of it, and then I'm going to pull the materials back, tighten it up. So I've got about 5 or 6 turns on there, and then I'm going to pull this tight, come in with my scissors, just clip it. Like I said, if I got some errant little fibers in there, I'll cut them out right now. Now I'm just going to wrap my thread over the butt sections of that. And I like to put a 1/2 inch on here just to make sure I don't walk away from it and pull it out. You could leave the fly just like that, whip finish, and be done, but what I like to do, because the Hendrickson actually has a larger head, is I'm going to take a small noodle of dubbing, maybe 1.5 inches, and very, very thin, and I'm going to make a head on here. Just like you see here. And then put my thread in front, and then I'm going to whip finish. It's just an added little detail. Like I said, if you got some errant fibers here, just cut. Now's the time to cut them out. Once you've done that, cut your thread. Now you can go in and put a little tiny drop of head cement. I'm using some Solara's Bone Dry around your thread wraps. Be ever so precise if you possibly can. And you'll see, like, you'll trap these little guard hairs in here. Try to cut them out of the way. Stuff like static cling, it sticks to everything. Now, next thing I'm going to do is the last little step here, and you hear me talk about how these are kind of relatively flat. I'm going to come in with a pair of non-serrated pliers, and on the top and the bottom, I'm going to flatten this guy out. I do that last because if you flatten your lead out in the tying process, chances are really good that it's going to break. And if you'll see, that's kind of what your fly looks like. Like I said, I tie these in 16s, 14s, and 12s. I also do a soft tackle version. I'll spin that one up next and send it out to you guys. And then, yes, I will do some more streamers, folks. Alright? But that's the Spectrumized Hendrickson Nymph. Like I said, I don't know if... I don't claim originality to this or design to it. I just think it's an amalgamation of a whole pile of really cool techniques and simple nymph basics, but it's a highly effective pattern, especially during Hendrickson time. I never leave home without these in my box early spring. The beauty of the Hendricksons in the Northeast is this is the first big mayfly hatch that gets a lot of big fish going. So, and that's it. Hope you enjoy it. Thanks for tuning in. If you got any questions, drop them in the comments, folks. All right.